The alarm screamed through Valdris Outpost at 3 in the morning. Jiwoo rolled out of her bed before her eyes were fully open. Her hands moved on their own, pulling on her medical uniform. She had done this hundreds of times before. Emergency calls were common on a space station that served as a trading hub for dozens of alien species. She ran down the metal corridors, her boots making sharp sounds against the floor. The emergency lights painted everything red. Other crew members rushed past her, heading to their stations. Jiwoo's breath came fast as she pushed through the door to the security office. Taemin stood at the main console, his face tight with worry. He was the station's security chief and had been Jiwoo's friend since she arrived 2 years ago. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, pulling up information. "What happened?" Jiwoo asked, moving beside him. "Distress beacon. We found a ship drifting near the station. It's badly damaged." Taemin's voice was rough. He hadn't slept either. "There are life signs aboard, but they're weak." Jiwoo felt her stomach drop. "How many?" "3, small ones. Maybe children." Taemin looked at her and she saw something dark in his eyes. "The ship was attacked. There are bodies. Adults. All dead." The rescue team brought the ship into the docking bay within an hour. Jiwoo stood with her medical kit, waiting as the airlock cycled open. The smell hit her first. Burnt metal and something else. Something that made her throat tight. Taemin entered first, his weapon ready. 2 other security officers followed him. Jiwoo counted to 10, then went in after them. The inside of the ship was a nightmare. Scorch marks covered the walls. Equipment hung broken from the ceiling. Blood stained the floor in dark pools. Jiwoo had seen death before, but this was different. "This was violence, here," one of the security officers called out from the back of the ship. Jiwoo pushed past the wreckage. In a small cargo hold, 3 small creatures huddled together in the corner. They were Velkari, a species Jiwoo had only seen in pictures. They looked like a mix between rabbits and deer, with soft fur that changed colors based on their emotions. Right now their fur was pure white, the color of terror. The cubs were tiny. The largest was maybe the size of a human 5-year-old. Their big eyes were dark and wet with tears. They shook as they pressed against each other. "Poor babies," Jiwoo whispered. She took a step forward. All 3 cubs screamed. It was a high, piercing sound that made Jiwoo freeze. They scrambled backward, trying to push themselves through the wall. Their small bodies trembled so hard she could see it from across the room. "They're afraid of you," Taemin said quietly. He had moved to stand beside her. "Velkari are prey species. Humans are classified as predators. They can smell it on us." Jiwoo felt something cold settle in her chest. She looked down at her hands. Just hands. She had used them to heal hundreds of beings. She had never hurt anyone in her life. But these children looked at her and saw only a monster. "We need to get them to medical," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "They need food and water. Treatment for shock." It took an hour to move the cubs. They fought every step, their small voices crying out in their own language. Jiwoo didn't need translation to understand. They were calling for their parents. Parents who would never answer. The medical bay had a special quarantine room with a clear wall. Jiwoo set up beds and brought in supplies. The cubs huddled in the far corner, as far from the door as they could get. Their eyes never left her. "I won't hurt you," Jiwoo said softly. She knew they couldn't understand her words, but maybe her tone would help. "I promise. I just want to help." The cubs pressed closer together. The smallest one made a sound like a whimper. Jiwoo backed out of the room slowly. She sealed the door and stood on the other side of the clear wall. Her hands shook as she prepared nutrient packs. The cubs needed to eat soon or they would get sick. Taemin found her there 2 hours later. She was still standing at the wall watching the cubs. They hadn't moved from their corner. "The station council wants to meet," Taemin said. "They need to decide what to do with them. They're children. They need care." Jiwoo didn't look away from the cubs. "The nearest Velkari colony is 3 weeks away by ship." "And Jiwoo," Taemin put his hand on her shoulder. "No prey species will come near the station. Not with so many predator species living here. They won't send anyone to get these cubs. Then we take care of them until they're strong enough to travel. Who will do it? Every species on this station is classified as a predator. Every single one." Taemin's voice was gentle but firm. "Those cubs will starve before they let any of us near them." Jiwoo turned to look at him. "Then I'll find a way. There has to be something we can do." The council meeting was long and frustrating. 15 different species sat around the table, all arguing in different languages. The translation devices struggled to keep up. Jiwoo sat quietly, listening as they debated. Send them back in their ship, one council member said. Set coordinates for the Velkari colony. They're too young to survive that journey alone, another argued. Then what do you suggest? We can't keep them here. They'll die of fear. Jiwoo stood up. The room went quiet. I'll take care of them. You're human, someone said. It wasn't an insult, just a fact. A fact that felt like a weight. I'm a medical officer. I've treated dozens of species. I can learn Velkari biology. I can keep them alive. Jiwoo's voice was steady even though her heart pounded. Can you make them trust you? The question came from a Kryn elder, a species with scales and sharp teeth. Can you make prey forget what you are? Jiwoo had no answer for that. That night she returned to the medical bay. The cubs were still in their corner. She had left food near the door, nutrient paste specially made for herbivores. They hadn't touched it. Jiwoo pulled a chair to the clear wall and sat down. She didn't try to enter. She didn't try to talk. She just sat there watching them, letting them see her. Hours passed. The station dimmed its lights for the sleep cycle. Jiwoo stayed in her chair. Her eyes grew heavy, but she didn't move. Just before she finally fell asleep, she saw the smallest cub lift its head. It looked at her for a long moment. Then it pressed closer to its siblings and closed its eyes. It was a start, a tiny one, but Jiwoo would take it. She would find a way to reach them. She had to, because those cubs deserved to live and she was the only one willing to try. Jiwoo woke with her neck stiff and painful. She had fallen asleep in the chair outside the quarantine room. The lights in the medical bay were brightening for the morning cycle. She blinked and rubbed her eyes, then looked through the clear wall. The cubs were awake. They sat in their corner, watching her with those huge dark eyes. The food she had left was still untouched near the door. Her stomach sank. They needed to eat. It had been at least 20 hours since the rescue, maybe longer. She didn't know when they had last eaten before that. Good morning, she said quietly, even though she knew they didn't understand. She stood slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. I'm going to get fresh food for you. I'll be right back. She walked to the medical bay's small kitchen. Her body ached from sleeping in the chair. She made herself coffee and stared at it without drinking. Her mind was already working on the problem. Taemin found her there. He looked as tired as she felt. Did they eat? Jiwoo shook her head. Jiwoo, you can't force them. Their instincts are too strong. Taemin leaned against the counter. The Kryn ambassador came by this morning. He offered to try feeding them. Said maybe a different predator species wouldn't scare them as much. What happened? They screamed louder than they did with you. Jiwoo closed her eyes. Of course they did. Predator was predator. It didn't matter what shape it came in. There's someone here to see you, Taemin said. A Velkari named Hyun. He works as a liaison officer on the lower decks. I didn't even know we had Velkari on the station. Jiwoo's head snapped up. A Velkari? Here, just one. He's been here for 6 months working with the trade office. He heard about the cubs. Hyun was small and slim with soft brown fur that reminded Jiwoo of deer. His ears twitched nervously as she approached. He wore a translator device around his neck. When he spoke, his voice came out soft and careful. I wanted to help, he said. Those cubs. What happened to them is terrible. Can you communicate with them? Jiwoo asked. Hope sparked in her chest. I can try. But Dr. Jiwoo, you should know something. Hyun's ears flattened against his head. I've lived here for 6 months. I've learned to be around predator species, but it took me 4 months before I could be in the same room without shaking. Those cubs have just lost their parents to violence. Their fear will be much stronger than mine was. The hope in Jiwoo's chest flickered but didn't die. Will you try to talk to them? Hyun nodded. Jiwoo watched through the clear wall as Hyun entered the quarantine room. The cubs' reaction was immediate. They lifted their heads and their ears perked forward. Relief flooded through Jiwoo. Finally, someone who could help. But then Hyun spoke and Jiwoo saw the cubs' bodies tense. He took a step forward and they scrambled backward. When he tried to approach again, the smallest cub began to cry. Hyun backed away quickly. He left the room and stood beside Jiwoo, his own body shaking now. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I smell like this place now. I smell like predators. To them, I'm contaminated. Jiwoo felt the words like a punch. What can we do? I don't know. Hyun's voice was sad. In our culture, we have something called a heart bond. It forms when someone makes a true sacrifice for us. When they give something of themselves, only then can we trust. But these are cubs. They don't understand sacrifice. They only understand fear. Another visitor came that afternoon. Minji, the station's botanist, brought information about Velkari dietary needs. She was a short woman with quick hands and a gentle manner. She had worked with Velkari plants before. They need fresh vegetation, Minji explained, spreading out her data on a screen, not just nutrient paste. Their digestive systems are delicate. They need specific types of leaves and roots. Can you get them? Jiwoo asked. I can grow them in the hydroponics bay. It'll take a few days for the first crop, but I can synthesize some supplements in the meantime. Minji looked at the cubs through the wall. Her face softened. Poor little ones. They must be so scared. Jiwoo spent the rest of the day researching. She read everything she could find about Velkari biology, culture, and psychology. The more she learned, the worse she felt. Velkari had been prey species for millions of years. Their entire evolution was built around avoiding predators. They could smell certain chemicals that predators produced. Humans produced those chemicals. Every human. There was no way to hide it. That evening, 3 other species offered to help. A Vashtar with purple scales brought rich protein paste. A Kryn elder brought meat-based supplements. A Thanix with 6 arms brought expensive imported grains. Jiwoo thanked them all. She brought each offering to the quarantine room and placed it carefully inside. The cubs watched from their corner. They didn't move toward any of it. Please, Jiwoo whispered through the clear wall. Please eat something. The cubs just stared at her. Night came again. Jiwoo sat in her chair watching the cubs. They were getting weaker. She could see it in how they moved, slower and more careful. The smallest one was barely lifting its head anymore. Taemin brought her dinner. She ate without tasting it. You need to sleep in your own bed tonight, he said. You're going to get sick if you keep this up. I can't leave them, Jiwoo. Taemin crouched beside her chair. What if you can't save them? What if their fear is too strong? Then I'll have tried everything I could. Jiwoo's voice was rough. I'm not giving up on them. A message came through that night from Elder Thess, a Velkari leader from the nearest colony. Hyun had contacted them. The elder's face appeared on Jiwoo's screen, old and wise and sad. I have heard what you are trying to do, Dr. Jiwoo, the elder said through the translator. It is kind, but you must understand. To our children, you are death itself. You smell of blood and hunting. Every instinct they have tells them you will eat them. Words cannot overcome millions of years of evolution. There has to be a way, Jiwoo said. Her voice cracked. They're children. They need help. The only way a Velkari overcomes fear of a predator is through proof. Proof that the predator values the Velkari's life more than their own. This is the heart bond I spoke of. But how can you prove this to cubs who cannot understand? The elder's words stayed with Jiwoo long after the call ended. She sat in the darkness of the medical bay, watching the cubs sleep. They pressed close together, finding comfort in each other. Day 3 began badly. The smallest cub collapsed. One moment it was sitting with its siblings, the next it was on its side, not moving. Jiwoo's training took over. She grabbed emergency supplies and ran into the quarantine room. The other 2 cubs screamed and threw themselves against the far wall. Jiwoo ignored them. She dropped to her knees beside the collapsed cub. Its pulse was weak, its breathing shallow. Starvation was setting in. I'm sorry, Jiwoo whispered as she prepared an IV needle. I'm so sorry. I know I'm scaring you, but I have to do this. The cub's eyes opened as the needle went in. It looked at Jiwoo with such terror that she wanted to cry. But her hand stayed steady. She taped the IV in place and connected the bag of nutrients. The fluids began to drip into the cub's tiny body. The whole time she talked. Her voice was soft and constant. I know you're afraid. I know I'm scary to you, but I promise I will never hurt you. I promise. I just want you to live. Please live. The cub trembled under her hands. Its siblings cried from across the room. Jiwoo finished the procedure and backed away slowly. She left the room and sealed the door. Her hands were shaking now. She slid down the wall outside the quarantine room and sat on the floor. She pulled her knees to her chest and tried to breathe. Daesom, the station counselor, found her there an hour later. She was a tall woman with kind eyes. She sat down beside Jiwoo without saying anything. I'm making it worse, Jiwoo finally said. Every time I go near them, I traumatize them more. You're keeping them alive, Daesom replied. Is that enough? If they survive but spend the rest of their lives terrified of their own shadow, you're doing what you can. That's all anyone can do. But Jiwoo wasn't sure that was true. There had to be something more. Something she hadn't thought of yet. She went back to her research. She read about Valkyrie family bonds, about how they raise their young, about what made them feel safe. And slowly an idea began to form. It was crazy. It was dangerous. But it might be the only way. Jiwoo looked at the cubs through the clear wall. They were watching her again, even the small one with the IV. Always watching. Always afraid. I'll find a way to reach you, she whispered. I promise. Jiwoo made her decision on the 4th day. She moved a small desk to the space just outside the quarantine room. She brought a pillow and a blanket. She wasn't going to her quarters anymore. If she wanted the cubs to trust her, she needed to be there. Always there. Taemin tried to argue with her. You need proper rest. You need to take care of yourself. I'm fine, Jiwoo said. She was setting up her computer on the desk, pulling up medical files she needed to review. You're not fine. You've lost weight. You have dark circles under your eyes. When's the last time you had a real meal? Jiwoo couldn't remember. The cubs are getting weaker every day. I don't have time to worry about myself. Jiwoo. Taemin's voice was soft. He knew that tone wouldn't work on her when she was like this. He sighed and left. The cubs watched her through the clear wall. They always watched now. Jiwoo had noticed they didn't hide in the corner as much anymore. They still stayed far from the door, but they sat where they could see her. She started talking to them. It didn't matter that they couldn't understand her words. She talked anyway. My name is Jiwoo, she said while she worked on her reports. I'm from Earth. That's a planet very far from here. I have a family there. A mother and a father. I had a little brother too, but he died when I was young. The cub's ears twitched when she spoke. She took that as a good sign. That's why I became a doctor. I wanted to help people who were sick. I wanted to make sure other families didn't lose someone they loved. Jiwoo looked up at them. I know you lost your family. I'm so sorry. I wish I could have saved them too. The smallest cub made a soft sound. Not quite a cry, but something gentler. Jiwoo began singing to them. Old songs her mother had taught her, lullabies in Korean. She wasn't a good singer, but the cubs seemed to like it. Their ears would perk up and turn toward her when she sang. Other people from the station started coming by. Minji brought food for Jiwoo. Fresh vegetables from the hydroponics bay. You have to eat, she said firmly. You can't help them if you collapse. Borum, one of the cargo handlers, brought her coffee every morning. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke, but he would nod at her and leave the coffee on her desk without saying anything. Daesum visited every evening. Sometimes she just sat with Jiwoo, keeping her company. Other times she would talk about her own day, about the small dramas happening around the station. Normal things. Things that reminded Jiwoo the world was bigger than this one room. Hyun came by several times. He would stand at the clear wall and speak to the cubs in their own language. They would listen, but they wouldn't respond. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't enough to overcome their fear. What do you tell them? Jiwoo asked one day. I tell them they're safe. I tell them the human is trying to help. I tell them their parents would want them to survive. Hyun's voice was sad. But they're too young to understand. They only know they're afraid. On the 5th day, something changed. Jiwoo was reading aloud from a book, a human story about a lost child finding their way home. She had been reading for almost an hour when she heard a sound. One of the cubs was chirping. It was a soft musical sound. The cub was looking right at her. Jiwoo froze. She didn't want to scare it by moving. Hello, she whispered. Are you listening to the story? The cub chirped again. Then its sibling joined in. They were talking to each other in their own language, making those gentle musical sounds. I wish I knew what you were saying, Jiwoo said softly. The smallest cub, the one she had to give the IV to, lifted its head. It looked at Jiwoo for a long moment. Then it made a different sound. Lower and softer than the chirping. Hyun had told her that sound. It was the Valkyrie sound for sadness. I know, Jiwoo said, her throat tight. I know you're sad. I would be sad too. She kept reading the story. The cubs kept listening. It was small progress, but it was progress. That night, Jiwoo fell asleep at her desk. She was exhausted down to her bones. The station's night cycle had begun and the lights were dim. She put her head down on her folded arms just for a minute. She woke to the sound of scraping. Her eyes opened slowly. For a moment, she couldn't figure out what the sound was. Then she saw the cubs had moved. They weren't in the back corner anymore. They were in the middle of the room. And they were eating. Jiwoo held her breath. She didn't move. She just watched as the cubs carefully nibbled at the food Minji had prepared, the fresh vegetables she'd grown specially for them. They ate slowly, nervously, but they were eating. Jiwoo felt tears run down her face. She didn't wipe them away. She was afraid any movement would startle the cubs. So she sat there perfectly still, crying silently as she watched them eat. They didn't eat much, and they scrambled back to their corner as soon as they were done. But it was something. It was hope. The next morning, Taemin found her smiling for the first time in days. They ate, she told him. Not much, but they ate. That's good news. Taemin looked at the cubs. They were back in their corner, watching. But Jiwoo, they only ate because you were asleep. Because you weren't watching them. The words stung because they were true. The cubs still saw her as a threat. They would only eat when they thought she couldn't see them. It's still progress, Jiwoo said stubbornly. More people started leaving things outside the medical bay. Small gifts for Jiwoo. A soft cushion for her chair. A warm blanket. A container of homemade soup. People she barely knew were trying to help. One person left a note. It was from a crew member named Iseol, someone Jiwoo had treated once for a broken arm. The note said, "You are doing something brave. Thank you for caring." Jiwoo pinned the note to her desk where she could see it. On the 6th day, the cubs started moving around more. They would explore their room when they thought Jiwoo wasn't watching. They would play gentle games with each other, chasing and tumbling. It reminded Jiwoo that they were still children, despite everything they'd been through. She started pretending to sleep during the day. She would put her head down and close her eyes, but she wouldn't really sleep. She would listen. And she would hear the cubs move around, hear them eat, hear them play. It broke her heart that she had to pretend not to exist for them to feel safe. But if that's what they needed, she would do it. Yeon visited that afternoon. He watched the cubs for a while, then turned to Jiwoo. They're stronger now. Their bodies are recovering. But they're still terrified of me. Yes. Yeon sat down in the chair beside her desk. Jiwoo, I need to tell you something about my people. About how we form trust. Jiwoo leaned forward. Anything that might help. Valkyrie trust is earned through sacrifice. When someone gives something precious to help us, we can see their heart. We call it offering your heart. Hyun looked uncomfortable. Our parents in times of great famine would go without food to feed their children. They would make themselves weak to keep their cubs strong. This sacrifice bonds us to them forever. You're saying I need to sacrifice something? I'm saying they need to see that you value them more than yourself, that you would make yourself vulnerable for them. Hyun's ears flattened. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know what sacrifice would mean to cubs who can't understand the concept. Jiwoo thought about his words long after he left. Sacrifice, vulnerability, what could she give that would prove she meant no harm? That night she had an idea. It came to her while she was half asleep, her mind wandering. It was a terrible idea, a dangerous one. But it might work. She would have to make herself weak. Make herself vulnerable. Show the cubs that she trusted them even though they didn't trust her. The question was, would she survive it? Jiwoo looked at the cubs sleeping in their corner, pressed close to each other for comfort. She thought about her little brother, who had died because nobody had helped him in time. She thought about all the people she'd saved over the years. She thought about why she became a doctor in the first place, to help, to heal, to make things better, even if it cost her everything. Okay, she whispered in the darkness. I'll do it. I'll offer you my heart. The cubs didn't hear her. They slept on, peaceful for the first time since she'd found them. And Jiwoo began to plan what she would do tomorrow. She would prove to them that they were worth everything. Even if it meant risking herself. Even if it meant making herself as weak and vulnerable as they were. She would show them what a human heart looked like when it cared. Jiwoo spent the morning preparing. She moved quietly, deliberately, checking and rechecking her equipment. Her hands were steady even though her heart was racing. What she was about to do was risky. If she did it wrong, she could hurt herself badly. But if she didn't do it at all, the cubs might never trust her. She had researched through the night. The medical database had information on neural therapy devices. They were used to help trauma patients. easing the psychological pain of terrible experiences. The therapy worked by using the patient's own neural energy, redistributing it to damaged pathways in the brain. But the device had a cost. It drained the user, made them weak and vulnerable for hours afterward. In a medical setting, patients were monitored carefully, given supplements, kept under observation. Jiwoo was going to use it on herself, with no monitoring, no safety net. In front of the cubs, she gathered everything she needed. The neural therapy device, fresh food for the cubs, prepared exactly the way Minji had shown her. A medical scanner that would display her vital signs clearly. And courage. She needed a lot of courage. Taemin found her in the equipment room. He watched as she loaded the neural device into a case. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have thought of sooner." "Jiwoo." His voice carried a warning. "What are you planning?" She turned to face him. "I'm going to prove to them that they matter more to me than my own safety. I'm going to make myself vulnerable." "That's insane. You don't know what will happen." "I know exactly what will happen. I've read the medical reports. The device will drain my energy significantly. I'll be weak and dizzy. I might pass out. But I'll survive." Jiwoo picked up the case. "And the cubs will see. They'll see me choose to weaken myself. For them. And if something goes wrong, then you're authorized to enter and help me. But give me time first. Give me a chance to reach them." Taemin looked like he wanted to argue more, but he knew Jiwoo well enough to know when her mind was made up. "I'll be watching. If I think you're in danger, I'm coming in." "Thank you." Jiwoo stood outside the quarantine room for a long moment. The cubs were awake, watching her as always. She took a deep breath and picked up the medical scanner. She turned it on and held it so the cubs could see the display screen. Then she entered the room. The cubs panicked immediately. They scrambled to the far corner, their bodies pressed against the wall. Their eyes were wide with terror. The smallest one started crying, that sad musical sound that broke Jiwoo's heart. "I know," Jiwoo said softly. She stayed near the door, moving slowly. "I know you're scared, but I need you to see something. Please, just watch." She held up the scanner. The screen showed her vital signs in bright colors. Heart rate, blood pressure, neural activity, all strong and healthy. Jiwoo made sure the cubs could see the display clearly. "This is me right now," she said. "See? I'm strong. I'm healthy. I'm what you're afraid of. A predator at full strength." The cubs watched her with terrified eyes. They didn't understand her words, but they could see the scanner. They could see the numbers. Jiwoo set the scanner down carefully. Then she pulled out the neural therapy device. It was a small unit with sensors that attached to the temples. She had never used one on herself before. Medical officers weren't supposed to. It was dangerous without supervision. She attached the sensors to her head. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated the device. "This will make me weak," she told the cubs. "It will drain my strength. But it will also help you. It can ease trauma, help scared minds heal. I'm going to use it to help you feel safe." She pressed the button. The effect was immediate. Energy drained from her body like water flowing out of a cup. Her legs felt heavy. Her head began to spin. The device hummed softly as it pulled neural energy from her system and sent out waves designed to calm traumatized minds. Jiwoo picked up the scanner with shaking hands. She held it up again so the cubs could see. The numbers on the screen were dropping. Heart rate slowing, blood pressure falling, neural activity decreasing, see? Her voice was weaker now. "I'm making myself vulnerable for you. Because you're worth it." Her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the scanner clattering beside her. The room spun around her. She felt cold and distant, like she was floating away from her own body. But she kept talking. You're worth everything. You're just babies. You're scared and alone. And you deserve someone who cares." The neural device continued its work. Jiwoo's vision blurred. She could barely see the cubs anymore. But she heard something, a sound she'd never heard before. The cubs were chirping. Not in fear this time. Something different. Confused, maybe. Or curious, Jiwoo tried to reach for the food she'd brought. She'd planned to offer it to them while she was weak, to show she meant no threat. But her arms wouldn't cooperate. She could barely lift her hands. "Sorry," she whispered. Can't reach it." "The food's there for you. Please eat." She saw shapes moving. The cubs, she couldn't tell anymore. Everything was going dark. Please be okay, she managed to say. Please live. Then she collapsed completely. Somewhere far away, she heard Taman shouting. Heard the door opening. But closer, much closer, she heard something else. Little feet. Moving toward her. A small, warm body pressed against her side. Then another. Then a third, the cubs. They were touching her. They were making soft sounds, worried sounds. It's okay, Jiwoo tried to say, but she wasn't sure if the words came out. She felt something soft touch her hand. A small nose, sniffing carefully. Then a gentle pressure, a paw resting on her palm. Jiwoo's eyes opened slightly. The smallest cub was right there, its face close to hers. Its big eyes weren't filled with fear anymore. They were filled with concern for her. It was concern for her. Hey, little one, Jiwoo whispered. I'm okay. Just tired. The cub made that soft chirping sound. Its siblings were pressed against Jiwoo's other side. They were warm. They were trembling, but not from fear this time. Taman and Dasom burst into the room. They stopped short, staring at the scene. Don't, Jiwoo said weakly. Don't scare them. Jiwoo, you collapsed. We need to get you to medical. Taman took a step forward. All three cubs made warning sounds. They pressed closer to Jiwoo, protective. They're protecting you, Dasom breathed. The cubs are protecting you from us. Jiwoo tried to smile. See? It worked. You're completely insane, Taman said, but his voice was gentle. But it worked. They helped Jiwoo out of the room slowly. The cubs followed, staying close to her. When Jiwoo had to stop to rest, sitting on the floor because her legs were too weak, the cubs sat with her. They pressed against her sides, offering warmth and comfort. The smallest cub kept touching her hand with its nose. Checking on her, Minji arrived with food. The cubs were hungry now, their bodies desperate for nutrition after days of hardly eating. But they wouldn't leave Jiwoo's side to eat. Bring the food here, Jiwoo said. She was lying on a medical bed now. The cubs curled up around her. Let them eat here. Minji brought the food. She placed it carefully on the bed. The cubs sniffed it, then looked at Jiwoo. It's okay, Jiwoo told them. Eat, please. The smallest cub picked up a piece of vegetable. It looked at Jiwoo. Then very deliberately it held the food out to her. Jiwoo felt tears come to her eyes. Thank you, little one. But I can't eat that. It's for you, the cub chirped insistently. It pushed the food toward her mouth. They're trying to feed you, Jan said from the doorway. He'd come running when he heard what happened. It's what Velkari cubs do for parents who are weak. They share food. It's a sign of family bond. Family? Jiwoo took the vegetable carefully with shaking fingers. She pretended to eat a tiny piece, then handed it back. You're my family now? The cub chirped happily and began to eat. Its siblings joined in. They ate while pressed against Jiwoo, sharing their warmth with her. You offered your heart, Hyun said softly, and they accepted. The cubs have bonded to you. Jiwoo closed her eyes. She was exhausted. Her body ached. She would need days to recover from what she'd done to herself. But the cubs were eating. They were healthy. And they were pressed against her, choosing to be close to her. She had reached them. Finally, she had reached them. Worth it, she whispered. So worth it. The smallest cub made a sleepy sound and tucked its head under her arm. The other two curled up closer. Taman pulled a blanket over all of them. Rest, Jiwoo. We'll watch over you. All of you. Jiwoo drifted to sleep with the cubs warm against her sides. For the first time since she'd found them, they all slept peacefully. A human and 3 small aliens who had learned that family wasn't about what you were. It was about what you were willing to give. Jiwoo woke slowly. Her body felt heavy and strange, like she'd been sick for a long time. She blinked and looked around. She was in a medical bed, but not the one in the quarantine room. This was a private recovery room, and she wasn't alone. 3 small bodies were pressed against her. The cubs were sleeping, curled up close to her sides and stomach. The smallest one had its head tucked under her arm. Every few moments it would make a soft sound in its sleep, like it was checking that she was still there. Jiwoo didn't move. She didn't want to wake them. She just lay there, feeling their warmth, listening to their breathing. The door opened quietly. Dasom entered, carrying a tray of food. She smiled when she saw Jiwoo was awake. Good morning. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a transport ship. Jiwoo's voice was rough. How long was I asleep? 2 days. You pushed yourself too hard with that neural device. Your body needed time to recover. Dasom set the tray down. The cubs refused to leave you. We tried to move them to eat in the other room, and they made such terrible crying sounds that we gave up. They have been eating here, sleeping here, staying right beside you." Jiwoo looked down at the small bodies pressed against her. "They really bonded to me. More than bonded. They think you're their parent now." Dasum pulled up a chair. Jan explained it to us. "What you did, making yourself weak for them, it triggered something deep in their instincts. In Valkyrie culture, that's what parents do. They sacrifice for their young. The cubs recognized it. I just wanted them to know I wouldn't hurt them. You did more than that. You showed them they were worth protecting, worth sacrificing for." Daesam's eyes were gentle. "That's what love looks like, Jiwoo." The smallest cub stirred. Its eyes opened, those huge dark eyes that had been so full of fear before. Now they looked at Jiwoo with something else. Trust, maybe even affection. The cub chirped softly. It touched her hand with its nose, checking on her. "I'm okay, little one," Jiwoo said. She managed to lift her hand enough to gently touch the cub's head. Its fur was incredibly soft. "I'm still here." The cub made a happy sound and snuggled closer. Over the next few days, Jiwoo recovered slowly. The cub stayed with her the entire time. They would play gentle games on the floor of the recovery room while she rested. They would bring her things, trying to take care of her the way she had taken care of them. The smallest one in particular seemed determined to help. It would bring Jiwoo water in a small cup, carrying it carefully in its mouth. Most of it would spill, but Jiwoo always thanked the cub and pretended to drink what was left. "You're very helpful," she would say, and the cub would chirp proudly. Word spread through the station about what had happened. People Jiwoo had never met came by to see. They would stand in the doorway watching as the Valkyrie cubs curled up with a human, watching as prey species children chose to be close to a predator. "I didn't think it was possible," one visitor said. "She was a Kryn warrior, a species known for their hunting skills. My people have tried for generations to be accepted by prey species. We've never succeeded." "Maybe you were trying too hard to be accepted," Jiwoo said. The smallest cub was asleep in her lap while she spoke. "Maybe you needed to prove you weren't a threat first. By making ourselves weak? That goes against everything we are. I know, but sometimes love means going against what we are." Taemin visited every day. He brought reports from the station, updates on the search for a Valkyrie family to take the cubs, but mostly he just sat with Jiwoo, keeping her company. "The council is amazed," he said one day. "Some of them want to study what you did. Figure out if it can be replicated. It's not a science experiment, Taemin. It's just care." Jiwoo stroked the smallest cub's fur. "Anyone could do what I did if they cared enough." "I don't think that's true. What you did required a kind of courage most people don't have. The courage to be vulnerable." 3 weeks after Jiwoo first collapsed, she was fully recovered. Her strength had returned. The neural device had left no permanent damage. And the cubs were healthy and growing, their bodies strong from regular meals and care. But Jiwoo's heart was heavy, because she knew what was coming. The Valkyrie colony had sent a ship. Families who had lost cubs in the pirate raids were coming to claim the orphaned children. It was right. It was what should happen. The cubs deserved to grow up with their own people in a proper home, but Jiwoo was going to miss them so much it hurt. Hyun helped her prepare the cubs. He explained to them in their own language what would happen. Jiwoo watched their faces as they listened. They looked confused at first, then sad. The smallest cub looked at Jiwoo and made a sound she'd learned to recognize. The questioned sound. "Yes, I'll miss you too," Jiwoo said, her throat tight. "But you need to go home. To your own people." The cub pressed against her leg, shaking its head. "You'll have a real family. Parents who can teach you about being Valkyrie, who can give you a good life." Jiwoo bent down and gently touched each cub's head. "I want that for you. I want you to be happy." The day the Valkyrie ship arrived, the docking bay was crowded. Station residents came to see the reunion, to witness prey species and predator species standing together in peace, even if just for a moment. The Valkyrie families came down the ramp slowly. They were cautious, surrounded by so many predator species. But when they saw the cubs, their faces transformed with joy. Jiwoo watched as adults rushed forward, calling out in their musical language. The cubs looked at them, then looked back at Jiwoo. "Go on," Jiwoo said softly. "They're your people." The 2 larger cubs walked forward hesitantly. The Valkyrie adults surrounded them, making happy sounds, checking them over. But the smallest cub stayed pressed against Jiwoo's leg. One of the Valkyrie adults approached. Through Hyon's translation, she said, "You are the human who saved them. We heard what you did, how you offered your heart." "I just did what anyone would do," Jiwoo said. "No, you did what few would dare." The adult looked at the smallest cub, still clinging to Jiwoo. "That one has chosen you. We can see the heart bond. It's rare, but it's real. What does that mean?" "It means the cub sees you as parent, as family. We cannot break such a bond. It would harm the cub deeply." The adult's face was kind, but the cub needs to be with its own kind to learn our ways. This is a difficult situation. Elder Thess was on the ship. The old Velkari came down the ramp slowly, leaning on a walking stick. When Hyun introduced Jiwoo, the elder looked at her for a long time. "So you are the human with a Velkari heart," Elder Thess said. "I wanted to meet you myself. To see if the stories were true?" "I'm just a doctor," Jiwoo said. "I wanted to help them." "You did more than help. You changed them. Changed their understanding of what predator means." The elder looked at the cubs. "And you changed something in our people too. We Velkari have lived in fear for so long, fear of those who would hunt us. But you showed these cubs that predator and prey are not destinies. They are choices." "Anyone could have done it," Jiwoo insisted, "but only you did." The elder smiled. "We would like to honor you, to create something in your name so our people remember what you taught us. That's not necessary. It is necessary. Because change is hard and people forget quickly. We want to remember." The ceremony was simple but moving. The Velkari family stood together and sang. Their voices created harmonies that made Jiwoo's eyes water. It was beautiful and sad at the same time. When they finished, Elder Thess spoke. "We will create a garden on our colony, a place where predator and prey species can walk together in peace. We will call it Jiwoo's heart, because you showed us that hearts matter more than teeth." Jiwoo could barely speak. "Thank you." The families prepared to board the ship with the cubs. The two larger cubs went willingly, excited to meet their new parents. But the smallest cub refused to move. It sat at Jiwoo's feet making distressed sounds. Jiwoo knelt down beside it. "You have to go, little one. You'll have a good life there, parents who love you, friends to play with." The cub touched her hand with its nose. Then it made a sound that needed no translation. "A request you want me to visit?" Jiwoo asked. The cub chirped hopefully. I don't know if I can. It's very far." "We would welcome you," Elder Thess said. "You would be honored guest in our colony. Come whenever you wish. Stay as long as you like. The cub will need time to adjust, but knowing you will return might help." Jiwoo looked at Taemin. He nodded. "We can arrange it. You're due for leave time anyway." "Then yes," Jiwoo said to the cub. "I'll visit. I promise." The cub made a happy sound and finally walked toward the ship. It looked back several times, and each time Jiwoo waved. The other two cubs ran back to touch her one more time before boarding. As the ship prepared to leave, Jiwoo stood in the docking bay and watched. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling too. Taemin put his hand on her shoulder. "You did something incredible. I just cared about them. That's what made it incredible." 3 months later, Jiwoo received a message. It was a video from the Velkari colony. It showed a beautiful garden with paths winding through flowering plants. Velkari cubs played there, running and jumping. And there, carefully tended in the center, was a stone marker with her name. Below her name, written in both Velkari and human languages, were words. "Here we remember that love needs no fangs, that care requires no claws."